be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to Marvel Requests Monday. It has been a long time since we made one of these videos, but for those of you new guys, Marvel Requests Monday is a weekly series where I hand over the reins of my YouTube channel to you guys, and let you guys decide what character, team, or concept I'll do a discussion on related to Marvel Comics. This week, we're focusing on the relationship between Mistress Death, Thanos, and Deadpool. So the relationship between Deadpool and Mistress Death and Thanos is really kind of interesting here. What we're going to do with this video is we're going to split it in half, basically. We're going to have the first portion talking about Deadpool, and then we're going to have the second portion talking about Thanos. And what we're going to find is this really interesting concept where we see that with Joe Kelly's run on Deadpool, the relationship between Deadpool and Death is relatively comedic. But when we get to Thanos and we talk about Jason Aaron, Thanos Rising, and so on and so forth, we're going to find the relationship is actually much darker and it's very sinister. But with Joe Kelly's run on Deadpool, what we do is we actually jump to Deadpool 1998 with the whole Mistress Death and Deadpool event. And what this does is it really kind of gives us, I guess, an origin of sorts to the idea of Deadpool. That is to say, when he first became Deadpool, when he gained his healing factor and so on. And when he was being experimented on by the government, one of the things that kept him going was the promise of being able to be with Mistress Death. In fact, she had basically told him here that if he had effectively given up when he went through this process, when the time came when he died, if he had surrendered himself, he would have had her. But over the course of these experiments, before it is that he actually, I guess, goes through the process of dying, he and Mistress Death have this very, very physical relationship with one another, where they're very intimate with each other is the best way I know how to describe it without getting too in-depth. But for the most part, these are basically just a series of events that characterize Mistress Death as being more human in nature, as being less sinister, as what we had seen with her appearance in various Thanos stories and so on. But of course, what we had seen is that by the end of this entire thing, that Mistress Death, who had basically confessed that she would fall in love with Deadpool, that Deadpool could be with her forever, was ready to embrace him when the time came when he was about to die. But the problem was his healing factor kicked in. And so as a result, he was not able to marry Mistress Death. He was not able to be with Mistress Death for eternity. Now, this entire story actually keeps on. It continues on in Deadpool Volume 1, I believe, and during Joe Kelly's run with issues number 61 through 64. And what this was called the Funeral for a Freak storyline. And what this did was give us the events, including I guess the arch nemesis, as we consider it, of Deadpool, a villain named T-Ray, who ultimately cursed Deadpool with life. Now, this is kind of a misnomer here. A lot of people believe that it was Thanos who had cursed Deadpool with life, and Thanos did to a degree, but he did it through T-Ray. T-Ray, who of course was previously, I guess, a mercenary that competed with Deadpool for contracts and things like that, but was ultimately the byproduct of Deadpool having killed T-Ray's family for reasons that we'll get into another time. The result here is that T-Ray had involved himself in different kinds of mysticism, different kinds of supernatural arts. And so during the Funeral for a Freak story, when Deadpool was presumed to be dead and was actually getting ready to join Mistress Death, that his hand, which was still there, began to sprout the rest of his body, and as a result, he ended up living on. And that's how we really gain the idea that Deadpool can grow from a single hand, because this is where it happened, is in this story. Now, over the course of a Funeral for a Freak, Deadpool copes with the fact that he's basically going to be living forever. Of course, he confronts and learns that T-Ray was the one that did this to him, but at the very end of the story, in issue number 64, we find that it was Thanos who had cursed him. Now, again, Thanos had cursed Deadpool with life by virtue of T-Ray, because in Thanos' mind, Thanos was in love with Mistress Death, and Mistress Death was the only person, or I guess Thanos is the only person that Mistress Death should be with in the eyes of Thanos. And so because Mistress Death had proclaimed her love for Deadpool, Thanos effectively cursed him so that he could never die, and so that he would be in love, or I guess Mistress Death would never be able to be with him as long as he is in in existence, I guess, for all eternity. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Deadpool can't just simply be wiped from the face of existence by somebody, like Galactus or something like that. But for the purpose of anybody killing him in any conventional means, it simply means that he and Mistress Death will never be together again. Now, we don't really know, at least I'm not really sure, what kind of ramifications this has in relation to Mistress Death's perception of Thanos. But what we're going to do here is we're going to transition over to Thanos. We're going to transition over to the story of Mistress Death and Thanos. And what we're going to find here is that this is a very long-standing relationship between the two of them, but it's a very dark and a very sinister relationship here. So where the relationship between Deadpool and Mistress Death was more comedic, where it was more kind of this parody of the idea of Mistress Death and more in-depth in the realm of them having a physical and very heated relationship, the relationship between Mistress Death and Thanos is much, much darker. And in fact, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be citing Jason Aaron's Thanos Rising, which pretty much gives us the origin of Thanos in Marvel Comics. And the reason why is because what we're going to find is that Mistress Death actually meets Thanos when he's a child, and indeed, this is what we see. Of course, once Thanos is already born, he's depicted as being kind of strange, and his mother really believes that he's going to grow into be some kind of a monster, and so with an attempt to kill him, she fails and is ultimately housed in an insane asylum. And Thanos, as he grows, as he gets older, of course, makes friends with various classmates and whatnot, but this is when Mistress Death visits him for the first time. Now, she visits him and relates to him as a child, and what she does is basically go to him, really kind of trick him into believing that because he's different, that ultimately he'll never be accepted by that group. But what we also find is that she uses little tactics, she uses little things to ultimately steer him on this course to become an evil person. For example, one of the things that happens here when he's a child is that he takes several of his classmates, of his friends, into a cave which is housed by these relatively large lizards which dot the landscape of the moon of Titan. And what happens here is that there's some kind of a cave-in, and so once Thanos is able to actually dig himself out here, he finds the rest of his classmates, but they've been eaten alive, or they had been consumed by all these different lizards. And so once Thanos gets back, once he makes it back to the surface, he's considered to be the one who had actually done this. People believe that he's the one that had murdered these people, murdered these children. And so again, Mistress Death uses this as a way to kind of feed on this growing perception of Thanos. Now again, she doesn't really tell us why it is that she does this, at least not yet. We're simply just kind of given this idea that he's ultimately beginning to form this relationship. And so what happens with the coaxing of Mistress Death, Thanos, who was seeking to find out why he is the way he is, why he looks different, what it is about him that gave him his genetic mutation, begins to go about this process of dissecting and experimenting on various things. But at the same time, he also begins to take a more sinister road. A really good example here is that in response to these lizards having eaten his friends, after the goading of Mistress Death, he travels back to the cave and then kills them all. But what he also does is take some of these lizards and experiment on them. That is to say, he dissects them and analyzes them. After these lizards, he moves on to these, I guess, cave trolls would be the best way to describe them, or cave apes. And again, he's really kind of dissecting them, but the entire time, he's talking to her about what it is that he's doing. He's explaining what it is that he's doing, what he's trying to find here. And ultimately, as things progress, he begins moving into the realm of other Titans, actually killing other people from the realm of Titan, or from the moon of Titan, in an attempt to understand the genetic makeup of I guess, people and of different materials within the realm of Titan, to understand why it is that he's come to be the way he is. Now, all this really begins to come to a head once Thanos becomes an adult, after he leaves Titan. And what he does is, again, he begins going about the cosmos. Of course, he has several children, he is with several women, and for the most part, it seems as though he's left this woman, Mistress Death, behind on Titan. So at this point, he's just kind of by himself. But again, as time progresses, what Jason Aaron really tells us here is that regardless of the women that Thanos had fallen in love with, regardless of the women that he had children with, that ultimately none of them were Mistress Death. And so this really begins to take shape and form and explain to us why he's so obsessed with the idea of Mistress Death. Now, eventually the time comes, after he had conquered various ships, or I guess conquered a particular pirate ship, taken over as captain, as well as formed some sort of armada, that he returns back to Titan. And when he does, he actually meets Mistress Death again. And what Mistress Death does is continue to goad him, but at this point in time, Thanos, being more mature, is pursuing her as a romantic interest now, as opposed to when they were young. younger. And so what she says is that she'll give herself over to Thanos, but only once he has no more wives and no more bastard children. So what he does is actually go back into the cosmos and kill every single child and every single wife that he had had. Now, of course, we know he's not successful in killing them all, which was the entire basis for the Infinity Event when Thanos came back to the planet Earth and was looking for his bastard son. But what we do know is that as far as we know in this circumstance, Thanos has killed pretty much everybody. And so again, speaking with Mistress Death continues to really kind of goad him here and really kind of continue on and to say that all he has to do is do one more thing. If it's just one more thing, she'll give herself over to him. And that's how it always works with the relationship between Mistress Death and Thanos. As long as it's one more thing, then he'll go through with it. But what's also really funny here is that once he actually takes back off into space, Mistress Death presumably follows him. But the problem is that no one else can see Mistress Death. And so as far as the other members of his crew are concerned, they see him either taking corpses into his private quarters and then crying because they won't embrace him, or else talking to someone that no one else can see. And so of course they consider him to be quite insane here. And in the face of this revelation, when Thanos asks who this woman is, what she does is reveal herself to in fact be Mistress Death. Now, what Jason Aaron establishes here is that Thanos didn't know this before. Thanos didn't know this woman was Mistress Death. Everything he had been doing up to this point had been the coaxing of a random woman, a woman he had fallen in love with but couldn't let go of. And what she tells Thanos is that by virtue of his actions, by virtue of what it is that he's done up to this point, that everything that he's lived for basically means that Death is the only person that could ever truly love Thanos, that no normal mortal being or even immortal being that has any measure of compassion could ever really fall in love with Thanos. And what we would expect here is that Thanos would walk away, but instead he doesn't. But again, this really just kind of ties into the idea of Thanos, that his obsession, his affection for Mistress Death is because in the end, there really isn't anyone he feels that he can love besides her, because he's killed so many people, because he is so immersed in the concept of death. It seems as though Mistress Death is truly the only person he could love. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and be sure to submit your request for next week's Marvel Request Monday. And yeah, so I will catch you guys later. Peace.